In today's lesson we're going to be making ourselves a little French tutorial where we're going to learn to speak a couple of phrases in French. If I just run this animation now, you're going to get an idea of what it's going to look like. So we've got this fancy coloured ball that bounces around the page, the words French lesson appear, and you can click the enter button to enter the little app. Once in the app you can click on these buttons to hear somebody talking.
Hello.
So you can hear the English person speaking.
How are you? Goodbye.
And if you want to hear the corresponding phrase in French,
Bonjour. Comment allez-vous? Au revoir.
you can push those buttons as well. So it's a pretty cool little app. It's going to take us 2 videos to get through this one. So I'm just going to put my headset on now and we can get started. So we're going to start today in Flash or Animate, whichever version you have, and we're going to make ourselves an ActionScript 3.0 file. And make sure you go to your magnification box over here on the right hand side and choose Fit in Window so you can see the entire stage. Now the first thing you want to do is get that little coloured ball bouncing around the page. So I'm going to rename layer 1 to ball, and over in my toolbox here I'm going to grab the oval tool. I'm going to turn the stroke off and just select any colour for my ball. I might start with pink. And just hold shift and draw a ball on your page, roughly that size. Once you've drawn it, grab your black arrow and click on it. We need to go up to the modify menu and convert that shape to a symbol. Give it the name ball, leave it as a movie clip, don't worry about registration, just click on OK. You should get a blue box appearing around the outside of that shape now to show that you have converted that ball into a symbol. Alright, let's start animating this. We're going to use classic tweens to animate this ball today. It's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to go across 20 frames to put in my end point. So I'm going to press F6. Okay, so I've got a starting point for my animation. I've got an ending point. So on the end point, I basically want this ball to come down and hit the bottom of the page. Okay, when it hits the bottom there, I'm going to go across to my color effect, change it to tint, just bump that tint to 100%, and you can choose another color. I'm going to choose the blue over here as my next color. Okay, so right clicking between those two dots and creating a classic tween will make that ball move and change color. So 2 things will happen. It's going to move from its starting position down to its end position, and it will also fade from pink to blue. So let's have a look. Okay, pretty simple. So what we've got now at frame 20 is our next starting point. If I go along to frame 40 and press F6 to put a keyframe in, it's going to make a new end point. So I'm going to make that ball pop over to the side here. Okay, once it hits that wall there, I'm going to change the tint again. This time I'm going to go up to the yellow color. I can now right click between those dots and create a classic tween, and you'll see that my start point where it's blue, my end point where it's yellow, Flash has filled in the gaps, and you can see it fades from blue to yellow and moves up a little bit further. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat this step a few times. I'm going to go up to frame 60, press F6. I've got a new ending point now, so I'm going to move this ball over to the top there. I'll change the tint color to, let's say, this blue, and make a classic tween. Okay, so you can see that ball changing color and changing position. Along to frame 80, I'll press F6. I'll move the ball down here this time. Change its tint color to green, and make a classic tween. See the ball now goes from blue to green. You want to keep going a little bit further. I'm going to go up to frame 100 now, press F6, I'm going to move the ball back up here. Might go to the colour red, classic tween. We'll do one more I think, and then I'll start to finish this off. So I'll go to frame 120, I'll move this ball down the bottom, change its colour to, haven't we gone yet, let's say a purple colour. Make a classic tween, and finally we're going to finish at 140. So press F6, and you want to finish in the middle of the page. So find roughly the middle of the page and drop your ball there. Change your colour to whatever colour you want. I might even go black for this one, and make yourself a classic tween. So let's just go back to the start and preview how animation is looking now. So I'll click back on frame 1 and press enter. And we should have our ball just bouncing around the page. I guess it's a little bit slow, but should be right. Oops, I just bumped the button. Not too bad. Okay, once it gets to this center position, what we want it to do is grow bigger. Okay, and we're also going to get it to fade out and disappear. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up, instead of 20 frames, I'm going to double it. I'm going to go up to 40 frames later, so frame 180. And there I'm going to press F6, and I'm going to grab my free transform tool. It's just below my black arrow up here in my toolbox. I'm going to hold shift and just stretch this out until it fills the page. And I'm going to make a classic tween. So what that's going to do is once the ball hits the center, it's going to start growing. Okay. We also want this to fade out over time. So at frame 140, which is its starting point, it's at full opacity. By the time it gets to frame 180, we want this circle faded out so it just disappears off the stage. So grab your black arrow and click on it. Make sure you're on frame 180. And all you need to do is change where it says tint to alpha and drag that alpha down to 0%. Alrighty, so let's have a look. When we press enter around frame 140, change color again for some reason, that doesn't matter, and the ball grows and it disappears. Okay, that's our ball layer finished. What we're going to do next is we're going to get some text to come onto the page that says French lesson. So I'm going to make another layer now. I've locked my ball layer by hitting the little padlock. Now above that ball layer on the new one, I'm going to write the word French. And basically we're going to grab a text tool, change the color to blue since the blue is in the French flag. I'm on Roboto as my font. You can choose whatever font you want really. I might just change it to maybe Roboto bold. Click on the page and write French. A little bit small for a heading, so I'm going to highlight it and turn the size up a bit. Might have to stretch my box out a bit too so you can see it. It's probably a little bit too big now. Let's go with that roughly. So I'm going to have the word French appear there, and I'm going to have the word lesson come in after it. Now for the word French, what I'm going to do to it is make it fade in. So I'm going to go to modify and convert it to a symbol, and I'm just going to call it French. Leave it as a movie clip and leave the registration. Just click OK. Should get a blue box appearing around that. Now what we're going to do is we need to go to our timeline first of all and fix up what's going on here. At the moment the word French is on frame number 1, so it's sitting right on top of the page while our ball floats around, and we don't want that. What we're going to have to do is click on frame 1 and just get it selected, and then pick it up and drag it up to the end of our timeline, which is at frame 180 at the moment. So when that other ball disappears, that's when our next animation is going to start. That's where the word French is going to appear. So at frame 180, that's our starting position. And basically what I want this word to do, fade in, say over the course of, well, let's say 30 frames. So I'm going to go up 30 frames later to frame 210 and press F6. So I've now got a starting point and an end point for my animation. At the starting point, I'm going to grab my black arrow and I'm going to click on the word French just to make sure it's selected, and I'm going to change my color effect again and change the alpha to 0%. Okay, remember you can use this scroller here to get down to 0. At frame 210, which is the end of my animation, it should be fully visible on the page. If you can't see that, you'll just have to turn your alpha back up to 100%. So I'm going to right click between those and make a classic tween, and Flash will fill in the gaps where my word French fades in. That's all I want it to do really. Once it's faded in, I just want it to sit there for, well, let's say another 30 frames I guess. So from frame 210 to 240 we'll press F6 and just let it sit there doing nothing. I'm going to lock that French layer now. I'm going to make one more new layer. So rename it by double clicking on it where it says layer 3, and we'll call this one lesson. Now in the lesson layer, we basically want the word lesson to appear on the stage next to the word French. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start that animation at frame 210. Okay, that's when the word French is fully faded in. So So once it's fully faded in on frame 210, I'm going to press F6 on the lesson layer, grab my text tool and change the colour to red. That's another French flag colour. And I'm going to write the word lesson. Okay, again, make sure it fits. Now I'm going to get this text to fly onto the page. Instead of it just fading in, I'm going to make it zoom across so it sits over here. Okay, so we need a starting position off the page. So I've just moved it off the stage there at frame 210. Now going to our endpoint, which is frame 240, I'm going to press F6, and I'm going to move it into its final position, which is going to be roughly there. I'm going to right click between those two dots and put a classic tween in. You'll see that Flash does the animating for us. It will make that text fly onto the page. So let's have a quick look at that now. French fades in, lesson flies on. A little bit slow, but she'll be right. We'll lock that layer, and the last thing I'm going to do is make a little button in here that we can push to take us into the tutorial. So I'm making a new layer, make sure the other ones are locked. This layer 4 we're going to rename to button. Oops, turn caps lock off. And for the button, we're not going to do anything fancy. We're just going to have it flash up just so it appears on the page right at the end of our animation here on frame 240. So at frame 240, we're clicked in there on the button layer. Press F6 to put a keyframe in. Now we want to bring a button in. Okay, now I might have shown you this in previous tutorials. Flash used to have a whole bunch of buttons built into the program, but they've scrapped that in the latest CC version in Adobe Animate and one of the latest versions of Flash. These are all the buttons. We want to bring them back into Flash. So what we're going to have to do is go to our File menu and choose the Import option and open External Library. From there, you just need to find your Year 10 ITS folder in Curriculum Drive, and you should see this buttons.fla file. Just open that up. Give it a sec. Actually, here it is hiding over here for me, but there's my buttons library. I can now right click on any of these folders and just expand all folders, and you can see all the buttons appear. I'm just going to use this first one. Actually, I might just change the color of it just to make it look a bit more exciting. I might roll with gold, and I'm going to drag that onto the page. And I can just close that buttons panel. We don't need that anymore. Now here's my enter button. It's pretty small, so I might grab my transform tool and just hold shift and resize it a little bit so it's a bit bigger. That looks pretty nice. And just move it into a position that you're happy with. So I think something like that's going to look pretty good. Okay, let me just test that whole animation out now. So we've got the ball that bounces around slowly on the page. I'd probably speed that up again if I had more time again, but never mind. Got the words French appear, lesson appears, and then the enter button comes up. Let's make this enter button work now. Okay, there's a few things we need to do here. First of all, when you click on this enter button with your black arrow, you need to give it an instance name. So we'll just call it enter. Okay. Now when we press this enter button, we want to go to a new scene. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go up to my window menu and select the scene panel. So at the moment we're on scene 1. I'm going to double click on that and rename it to, we'll call it splash screen. Then I'm going to make a new scene. I'll press that little button in the corner. And the new scene is going to be called tutorial. This is where our French tutorial actually takes place. Okay, so let's make our code work so that when we push this button it takes us to the tutorial scene. Okay, so click on your button once, go up to your window menu and select your code snippets. We'll let Flash write the code for us. We're going to go to our ActionScript folder, choose Timeline Navigation, and we're going to choose the click to go to next scene and play. If you double click that, the code will automatically appear, basically saying when you press the enter button with your mouse click, so that means when you click your mouse on the enter button, we're going to run a little function which basically says go to the next scene and play that. Alright, so that's fairly straightforward. Now, one other thing we need to do with this French lesson title page is we need to put in another bit of code that tells it to stop at frame 240. So once our animation's played through, we want it to stop at that point and not go any further. So back in our actions here, make sure you click on frame 240, and you'll need to bring your action script back up. Right at the very top in line number 1, I just want you to write the word stop, open and close a bracket and put a semicolon. That piece of code makes sure that our animation stops at frame 240, then we can push the enter button to make it progress through to the next scene. So that's our first scene all done. I know that page is looking pretty empty and pretty bare. If you wanted to schmick it up a little bit, maybe by putting a French flag in there or some pictures from France, by all means go for it. But for the sake of keeping this tutorial a bit shorter, I'll just leave it looking simple like that. Alright. One more thing we need to do on scene 2 here, which is the tutorial scene. We need to put in some action script or some code. So I'm going to write the word actions. And the first thing that we need to do so that our animation actually works, when we push that enter button, we want it to go to this tutorial scene and stop there. We don't want it to go any further. So we need to put in some stop code straight away. So let's just go to our action script box, press F9 to bring that up, and just put in the stop code. That single bit of code there, the stop, bracket, bracket, semicolon, will tell our animation to stop here once we get to this scene. So what we can do now is press Control Enter to actually test this scene, or actually test the whole animation out. So Control Enter will just export it as a Swift file. Up it pops in its own window. So we're looking for this ball to start growing, the words French lesson to appear, and then it will stop once the enter button appears. Okay, so far so good. When we push this enter button, we should go to the tutorial scene, which at the moment is a blank white canvas. Just like that. So everything's working so far. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here. This is part 1 of the tutorial done. In part 2 of our video, we're going to work on this tutorial page and get the sounds working. Okay, so I'll see you in part 2 of the video.